So back in 2002, I was very much into computers. I had started in probably 1996 for me. I had never built a brand new system at that point in time. I had had several hand-me-down systems. I had pieced together things here and there from other systems that I'd gotten from other people. Bought and sold, traded up. So I had some decent hardware. And I was actually starting to get a little bit of money from doing some side work at a family business. So I was able to scrape together enough money to buy some parts for a new machine. And that machine is basically replicated right here as close as I could. The case is a little bit different. This is actually an old iBuyPower PC case, but same vintage, very similar style, window case. I'm using blue LED 80mm fans. I am using blue neon CCFL fluorescent light kits. I'm using a 2800 plus Athlon XP processor. I actually had a 2600 plus AXDA 333 frontside bus though, so that would be the better of the two 2600 pluses. This is as close as I could find brand new. I'm using the same RAM I used back then, PC2700, so DDR333, 2 gigabytes, which would have been really hauling back then. I believe this is still a single channel system. Dual channel didn't come around until the Athlon 64. However, not really a big deal for the stuff I'll be running on it. And I am going to be running a BFG GeForce FX5500OC AGP. Back in the day, I actually had a 256 meg 5200 OC, so this should hopefully balance out pretty well, but it was a BFG card and it looked absolutely identical to this right here. So for the motherboard, I'm using an nForce 2 MSI micro ATX, actually mini ATX motherboard, and then I'm actually using a modern but very cheap Solid Gear Basics power supply. Reasoning behind that: A, vintage power supplies are actually kind of hard to find and expensive. B, this was $16, and C, these are still better made than the old PSUs. So you're less likely to fry your vintage components even with a brand new crappy power supply than you are with like a mid-grade old school power supply. The only thing I would caution is make sure the 5-volt rail is reasonably sturdy. Athlon XPs and old GPUs, even DDR, tend to draw very heavily on the 5-volt rail and not so much on the 12-volt. Moving around to the front before I start, you see the case is pretty of the era. The case I actually used back in the day had two LED bubbly effect lights on the front, which you could switch on and off. But it did have front USB, and it also had front FireWire, which this is a block off on this case. You can see a little bit of remnants of the old system that used to be in here. It used to be a Pentium 4, looks like. I grabbed a couple of parallel ATA drives just to fill the spots. This was a used case. And then I bought a media reader to stick in the 3.5-inch slot. This looks pretty vintage. Shows an AGP motherboard and a silver and black case on the front. So I thought this was pretty fitting. 13 bucks brand new at Micro Center. It is what it is. So I'm gonna open up the chassis now. Probably install the fans first. And then let's open up that motherboard and the processor and the RAM, get everything kind of screwed together and see how she goes. The thickness of steel on these old cases is remarkable compared to the crap you get on modern cases under about the $200 level. Pretty tidy in here, not too bad. We even have one stamped PCIe slot on the back that was never punched out. Odd that there's no spot for an 80mm fan on the back, but we do have spots for 4 of them at the front and 2 on the side door as well. So I'm probably going to be putting a total of 4 in, 2 on the side door, and then 2 in the front. I could consider more, but I think I'm actually going to run out of power supply socket things, and I'm already going to have to do some wiring on these fans because they are brand new, but they're from China, and each one of them needs a Molex connector. There's no pass-through, so I'm gonna be splicing these together because that's a little bit ridiculous. The Solid Gear power supply I bought does have Molex power connectors, but it doesn't have very many of them, so they're at a premium. Yeah, I guess let's open up that motherboard and get that slotted in here. Then we'll toss the RAM and CPU in. So it came with a reasonably nice floppy drive cable, a S-video and composite video out for the internal graphics, which we won't be using. Motherboard manual. Register your product with MSI. And drivers. We will actually very likely be needing this. I/O shield, and there's our nForce 2 motherboard. So there we go. The famous, venerable nForce 2 chipset. Really, really good, but nVidia didn't always have the best build quality on those things. Cooling on the VRM, actually pretty impressive. North Bridge cooler looks pretty decent. South Bridge is passively cooled. Modem port, 3 PCI ports, AGP 4X, I want to say. Integrated audio headers for CD-ROM and all that kind of stuff. There probably is a header for that graphics output. Excuse me. I don't necessarily see it, however. Front panel, which is actually labeled. That would be really early for a labeled one. Phoenix BIOS, pretty standard. Caged USB front headers. Again, that's way ahead of its time. Here we have our parallel ATA and our floppy drive connector. No serial ATA. This is before that 20 pin, not 20 plus 4. And then we have a 4 pin here. Historically, these are not very well located. CPU fan header, chassis fan header. Nothing too fancy. All the capacitors look beautiful. No swelling at all. I don't actually know what brand these are. It doesn't really matter, but I'm guessing they are Japanese if they've held up that well. Again, integrated video we won't be using. 2 USB 2.0 ports on the back, which we probably will be using. Integrated audio, which we will not be using. Probably 10100, not gigabit Ethernet. Gigabit really started with socket 939 and 755. Parallel, won't be using that. Serial, won't be using that. PS2, maybe if we have to, if we run out of other I/O. But the fact that this has two port front USB headers is pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the case with some standoffs, and then we'll get the CPU out. So I mentioned before, I used to use a 2600 plus AXDA. That was a just over 2000 megahertz processor. This is 2088, same FSB. As near as makes no difference. CPU and the bundled thermal solution. I have just cut the packaging open, but this has never been used before. Now, installing an Athlon XP is actually a little bit tougher than a modern CPU. You have to get a standard screwdriver in here, and then you push down and actually bend, and you can hook all 3 tabs on that opposite end. I did scrape off the factory applied thermal paste and apply a dab of Arctic Silver 5 just to give it the best possible fighting chance. Next up, I am going to install the RAM, and then we will go for that GeForce FX. RAM installed. Time to move on to that AGP slot. A couple parts I didn't show you before. I'm going to be slotting in a Sound Blaster Live, I believe, in this thing. And then I do have another network card, but since this has bundled Ethernet, I probably will just leave the internal Ethernet in place. At some point, I may throw in a SATA controller card right here and install a solid-state drive for booting. But in the meantime, the rest of these will just remain blank. I may see if I have some spares just to close it off, give it a little bit better aesthetic, but we'll see. Next up probably is going to be the sound card, then I will do the power supply. Then we'll go ahead and hook up the front USB, front panel, install those front fans, install the side fans, and get those neons working too. So I put 2 in the front, I put them both on the right side because that's where you see them the most, and honestly this is just a vanity build anyway. So there's that. I did install my Sound Blaster Live 5.1, and this is temporary. It's not in a good spot, unfortunately, because it's kind of blocking a little bit of airflow, but that is a gigabit Intel NIC with no front plate on it. That's just what I have kicking around right now. So I'll probably use that for installs just to speed up the networking a little bit, but then that'll probably come back out and I will use the bundled 10100. Next up, I'm going to pull the other side panel off, get the power supply inserted, and do some cable management. After that, I'll be putting in the IDE cables for the DVD drives. I'll be wiring in that front media reader, and I will get my 2 hard drives as well. I'm actually going to use a pair of 750 gigabyte Seagate Apple hard drives. I had these from an old Xserve RAID I parted out. I have a ton of these. and they are almost unheard of. Parallel ATA 750 gig hard drives. I will be setting the jumpers. I don't think Apple markets how to set those. And they may be on cable select right now, but I have to make sure that one's on master and one's on slave. So I'm gonna have to do something about that loose plate, but it even came with a silver faceplate. I'm really happy with that. It's got a front USB port, uses one blocked USB 2.0 header, which is perfect. My two 750 gig hard drives are in there. It would actually be kind of cool to get one of those old Promise RAID IDE controllers and try raiding a set of these hard drives to see what kind of performance I could get out of them. But as it sits, these should be able to max out the interface at 133 megabytes per second each. Power supply is in. Have to wire up all the connections, but while I'm doing that, I'm going to unwrap my rounded cable kit. You were the sauce if you had one of these back in the day. Not a lot of builders used them because they were about $30 a cable. This probably would have been an $80 set buying it brand new. So now they're about 10 bucks for a set of 3. Much better. Rounded IDE cables in. If you ever built with old IDE cables, you'll see just how nice these are to work with and how little they impede airflow. It's well worth doing in my opinion. So I think we're pretty much ready for a test boot. Did put the neons in, and I think the wires, when this is sitting normally, will sit below the window level with the other blue LED fans. So these should be, this should look really cool. I'm really excited. So for cable management, 2 zip ties to keep the Pentium 4 connector, the UPS, at bay. The 20 is here. I actually tucked the 4 back there because I'm going to use it for powering the fans if I can. There weren't enough Molex connectors on the bottom. There's a PCI up here, a Molex down there, so I used a 1-to-2 adapter that I had sitting around, tucked it with a zip tie right here. After I did that, I found I had a black floppy drive, so oops, but oh well. I am getting ready probably for the first test boot. However, and there is a however, I do have to get a VGA cable. Shouldn't be a big deal. I do have a VGA capture card in my computer. And, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, I have to grab a Windows XP install CD. I could try Windows 7 on this, but XP is much more of the era. Yeah, these cables were sitting around a long time. They're actually corroding. This metal is corroding on the inside of the sleeve. They smelled a little funky. I might wash my hands after that too, but either way, let me get it plugged into the test bench, and then after we get it running, we'll try to figure out exactly what we're gonna do as far as maybe cutting off one of the SATA connectors to power fans, or we'll see, but we'll figure it out. So I actually just put this monitor onto VGA. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, well, let me reset some stuff. Okay, good. We are in. It was just RAM that needed to be reseated, so I'm gonna go through and excellent. Everything is detected. 2800 plus, primary, master, slave. Go ahead and shut off the floppy drive because we do not have one. We're definitely gonna need to set the clock. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna go through there. I'll get the Windows XP disk rolling, and I'll come back to it here. Oh yeah, 8X Extreme. Let's see if we can get into a nice Windows XP. Here we come. Well, I have a little more cleanup to do, but I've got the fluorescent tubes in here. Not ideal blowing through that fan, but it's not terrible. I have to tuck the wires in here too. I actually used my little fractal fan control from another case, and I have it running on 5 volts at full blast because 4 of these China fans was too much load for the controller and it was cutting out. So let me shut off the lights in here for a second and I'll show you what we're dealing with. I mean, come on, if you had a computer that looked like that in 2002, you'd be pretty stoked, don't lie. I'm gonna have to see if I can get a little piece of cardboard to go over top of that fan, or move the neon back a little bit so it evens out between the two fans. And I'll have to find some more silver fan screws. Unfortunately, you can't really see the LED fans in the front at all. And I think I'm having issues with the top hard drive, so we'll see on that. But either way, this thing's looking pretty sweet. The Pentium 4, and unfortunately this cool sapphire sticker is going to come too. This isn't a P4 motherboard, but it is an MSI motherboard still. It's a period sticker, and my motherboard didn't come with one, so yeah. 5500 came with stickers, and the Athlon XP did as well. Oh yeah. Well, it's time for some drivers. Oh yeah. I'm tempted to just put all the bloatware on this. Why not? There is nothing quite like running ancient synthetic benchmarks on native hardware. 5500 seems to be powering right through this. No problem. There's our 3D Mark 01 score. There's our 3D Mark 2000 score. And here's our 3D Mark 03 score. I'm actually going to skip 05 and go straight to 06 now. I was wrong. 06 crashed, so that's the 3D Mark 05 score. And that is the newest benchmark I'll be running on this. Still, I gotta say, I love this really super tacky Windows blinds based BFG skin that it came with. And this computer is awesome to look at. I mean, I'm surprised how snappy it is. It's just great.